They told us the golden age of Hollywood was all glamour and fairy tales. But behind the studio lights were secrets so big they reshaped lives, careers, and even the films themselves. Tonight, we're lifting the velvet rope on 10 forbidden on-set romances that rocked Hollywood. Affairs of passion, betrayal, and in one heartbreaking case, a price paid in exile and lost family. Stick with me. Number 3 changed a star's life forever. 1. Clark Gable and Loretta Young. The secret child they met on a cold, remote location shoot for Call of the Wild in 1935. Clark Gable was already Hollywood royalty. Loretta Young had built a reputation as the girl next door, devout and carefully managed by the studios. Isolation on set long nights, and the raw intimacy of working together boiled over into a relationship that would haunt them both. When Young discovered she was pregnant, the stakes were enormous. In that era, a pregnancy outside of marriage could end careers, especially a woman's. What followed was one of Hollywood's most elaborate cover-ups. Young quietly gave birth and later presented the child Judy Lewis as an adopted daughter. For decades, Judy was raised believing that story. Only later, when a stranger remarked on Judy's uncanny resemblance to Clark Gable, did the truth come out. This wasn't a momentary fling. It was a secret that redefined 3 lives. Gable's refusal to publicly acknowledge the child, Young's decades of concealment, and Judy's own struggle with identity. It's a reminder that the chemistry we admired on screen sometimes had real and lasting consequences off it. 2. Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton. The affair that rewrote the rules. If Hollywood has a scandal that still pulses through pop culture, it's Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton on the set of Cleopatra. The film itself was gargantuan, famously expensive, but the real spectacle became the lovers who couldn't hide. Taylor, newly married to Eddie Fisher after a well-publicized affair that ripped apart another celebrity marriage, and Burton, also married through caution and discretion to the winds. They weren't quiet. Photographers followed them through Rome. They leaked kisses, embrace after embrace, and the press feasted. Their behavior prompted condemnation from pulpits, outrage in newspapers, and even moralizing speeches in political halls. Yet, the fallout was more than headlines. Marriages ended, reputations shifted, and the pair went on to marry and divorce each other twice. Their volatility bled into their work, sometimes to electrifying effect, but it also laid bare the hypocrisy of a culture that forgave men far more readily than women. Taylor and Burton's affair marked a pivot toward a more public celebrity culture, where private lives became part of the story. 3. Ingrid Bergman and Roberto Rossellini. The heartbreaking price. If any story on this list proves that love can cost everything, it's Ingrid Bergman's. In 1949, she sailed to Italy to star in Stromboli for Roberto Rossellini. Almost immediately, the director and his actress fell into an intense relationship. Bergman, already a beloved Hollywood star and mother, became pregnant. What happened next was brutal. America's moral authorities rallied. Bergman was denounced from pulpits, her films were pulled from some theaters, and one senator publicly chastised her. The studios, the press, and public opinion combined to punish her far more severely than they did many of her male contemporaries. Even worse, in the ensuing custody battle, she was separated from her daughter Pia for many years. Bergman paid with exile. For a time, she found herself persona non grata in Hollywood. She married Rossellini and bore his children, including a daughter who would later be known to the world as Isabella Rossellini. But the marriage did not endure. Rossellini had affairs of his own, and the relationship crumbled. In the 1950s, slowly, Bergman's career was rehabilitated. She won an Academy Award for Anastasia in 1956, but the scars of that public shaming remained. Bergman's story is a painful case study in how gender, power, and public morality intersected in ways that destroyed reputations and families. 4. Joan Crawford and Clark Gable. A decades-long secret. Clark Gable shows up again on this list, this time with Joan Crawford. Their chemistry began early on Fools, Dance in 1931, and it simmered for decades. MGM loved their pairing on screen and quietly facilitated a private relationship off it. The studio engineered cover stories, darkened windows, and staged public appearances to keep the affair out of headlines. Crawford and Gable's connection was a slow burn through Hollywood's most volatile decades. They worked together repeatedly. The studio funneled them into romantic parts because the audience could feel the spark. For Joan Crawford, the relationship became a private obsession. After the death of Gable's wife, Carole Lombard, in 1942, rumors said the two grew even closer. Gable never publicly committed, and Crawford carried that unfulfilled attachment with her for the rest of her life. Their story is an example of a long-term, secret intimacy that shaped careers while remaining by design out of sight. 5. Lana Turner and Tyrone Power. A passionate fling with consequences on Johnny Apollo in 1940, Lana Turner, barely out of her teens and already a screen siren, met Tyrone Power, a rising romantic lead. The attraction was immediate and fierce. Accounts from crew members mention kisses that didn't stop when the director shouted cut and private rendezvous between takes. The studio knew the danger. Power was married and a major investment for the studio system. Turner was a rising star they were grooming. They worked to contain the situation, warnings, security, and sometimes outright deception, including a bell system to alert a dressing room if an estranged spouse showed up. The fling burned hot and fast, and though brief, it left lasting memories for both actors. Turner would later say on private occasions that some loves leave marks you never quite shake. This was one of them. 6. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier. An affair of brilliance and sorrow. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier's relationship began in the mid-1930s and turned into one of the most celebrated and troubled unions in theatrical history. Both were married elsewhere when their affair began, and both later divorced to marry each other. Together, they produced luminous performances on stage and screen that cemented their legend. But passion cut both ways. Leigh suffered from severe bouts of mental illness that tested the marriage. Her bipolar disorder and later health problems strained Olivier, and rumors of affairs on both sides complicated the picture. What started as flaming devotion evolved into a long, often painful partnership that showcased extraordinary talent and extraordinary tragedy. Their lives remind us that even unions that produce great art can be haunted by private turmoil. 7. Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Devotion in secrecy. Few Hollywood romances are as quietly profound as Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. Their relationship, which began in the early 1940s, lasted until Tracy's death in 1967. Unlike the spectacle of some couples, Tracy and Hepburn lived a private, complicated love. Tracy, a devout Catholic, refused to divorce his wife, and so the two maintained a decades-long partnership that the public barely acknowledged. Hepburn became, in effect, a devoted caregiver in Tracy's later years, putting career choices and personal life in a different balance for him. Their tenacity and discretion created a private language on screen, a way of communicating that audiences felt even if they didn't know why. This was love conducted with a fierce respect for the constraints around them, and a reminder that not all passion demands public performance. 8. Greta Garbo and John Gilbert. The silent era's tragedy. In the silent era, Greta Garbo and John Gilbert created cinematic heat that audiences literally couldn't ignore. On Flesh and the Devil, they embodied a kind of erotic intensity that translated into box office gold. Gilbert left his marriage. He planned a life with Garbo. He lavishly courted her. But Garbo, famously private and fiercely independent, resisted the conventional trappings of marriage. She enjoyed the passion, but not the paper. The world believed a grand wedding would follow, but Garbo didn't appear at the altar. Gilbert was publicly humiliated, and his career later faltered with the coming of sound film, a collapse that some biographers link to the emotional toll of his relationship with Garbo. The story closes like many silent films, with longing, regret, and a sense that an unmatched love helped undo one of cinema's brightest stars. 9. Debbie Reynolds and Robert Wagner. A quiet comfort this, one is less tabloid and more whispered memory. After Debbie Reynolds' painful public divorce from Eddie Fisher, torn away when Fisher left her for Elizabeth Taylor, Reynolds reportedly found solace and temporary companionship with Robert Wagner while filming in 1959. Both were emotionally raw. Both sought comfort. If this was an affair, it was conducted in near silence, private meetings in bungalows, discreet arrangements organized by studio handlers. The relationship never exploded into scandal the way others did. Instead, it exists as a softer story, two wounded people finding temporary healing in each other's company. Reynolds later wrote that some confidences aren't hers alone to tell. In that restraint, there's a dignity that explains why this chapter of Hollywood history survives mostly as rumor and memory. 10. Desi Arnaz. The serial betrayal behind Lucy and Ricky Finally, the private life of one of television's most beloved couples, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. On screen, they were the American ideal, but off-screen their marriage was troubled by Arnaz's repeated infidelities. Colleagues remember a man who could charm anyone and who, over time, broke his marriage with a string of affairs. What makes this story especially tragic is the contrast between public fantasy and private reality. The show's warmth came from a real affection that existed alongside behavior that gradually eroded that trust. Ball eventually left. The divorce was painful for both and for the family. Yet, the show they built continues to live on as a cultural touchstone, an uneasy monument to what might happen when the mechanisms of entertainment conceal the fractures underneath. Why these stories matter at first glance? These 10 tales are gossip, stolen kisses, whispering hotel rooms, furrowed brows in dressing rooms. But look closer, and they tell us a different story. About how power worked in Hollywood, about who was punished and who walked away, and about how art and life collided. Some stars were ruined. Some were forgiven. The difference often came down to gender, studio loyalty, and who controlled the press. The chemistry that made a film unforgettable wasn't always acting. Sometimes it was real, messy, and consequential. Cleopatra felt scandalous because the heat was real. Stromboli showed pain through a face that was living it. When we study these affairs, we don't just learn celebrity gossip, we learn how the industry shaped and punished desire. If there's one truth through all these stories, it's this. The silver screen gave millions a refuge from their everyday lives, but it also hid very human stories, often tragic, sometimes tender, always complicated. The most compelling dramas in Hollywood, many historians say, never reached the editing room. They played out in hotel rooms on location and in small, private acts of courage and cowardice. So, the next time you watch a classic performance and feel the electricity between two actors, remember, sometimes the camera captures something true. Sometimes it captures the aftermath of choices that would echo across decades. Thanks for watching this deep dive into Hollywood's Golden Age secrets. If you want more stories that peel back the curtain on cinema history, the scandals, the triumphs, and the lives behind the legend, say the word and we'll keep exploring.